Can you imagine if Jesus, Buddha, or Krishna were alive today and on social media talking about how you can use the law of manifestation or attraction to get that perfect dream job, relationship, money, or career? No, right? But this is the state of pop spirituality today, where most people are using spiritual laws to create their perfect dream life. And there's nothing wrong with this except that chasing endless desires is only going to keep you stuck in a loop. And when you're trying to preserve your ego, preserve your identity, even with positive things, it has a limit. The ego has a bar. And this is also not the path that has been laid down by the greatest God avatars or the enlightened masters or written in the holy scriptures. Their path is that of enlightenment, which requires not superficial surrender, where you pretend to surrender but you have a checklist of things that you want, but deep surrender, where you have no demands of what you want and what you don't want. And this also involves realizing that this Maya is not an end in itself, and that this Maya is only supposed to be used to fulfill your karma and dharma so that you can attain higher stages of spiritual consciousness and eventually activate your inner sun. And I don't use the term inner sun here lightly. So, the entire cosmos represents a map for human evolution and transformation. So, let's say that you're trying to master a certain quality. When you're trying to do that, you're trying to master a certain zodiac. But when you're walking on this path of enlightenment, you are trying to activate your inner sun. So, this term is very literal in its symbolism. It's not just some metaphor, and it's not something as simple as activating your solar plexus chakra. So let's just think about the qualities of the sun. So the sun stands in the middle of our solar system, and it is literally the reason why we are alive. It creates us and it sustains us while it gets nothing in return. So it has the greatest responsibility while it is absolutely selfless. And as I've covered in my previous video, the sun is not just a physical body of light and gas. It is a plane of consciousness, also known as the Surya-Loka, which is alive with spiritual beings, and it is also a spiritual being within itself, which is living in the consciousness that can be known as Sat Chit Ananda. So Sat is absolute truth, Chit is pure consciousness, and Ananda is divine bliss. So this is the nature of the sun and its consciousness. And we also see this embodied in the various god avatars. So in this video, we will see how the different god avatars come from this essence of the sun, which is known as the solar logos. But if you just take a look at their lives, so Krishna, for example, had the greatest responsibility of literally directing Arjuna and teaching him spirituality while being in the battlefield. And Jesus was crucified. He sacrificed his life. And Jesus was a divine being. He did not really have to go through that entire process, but he chose that. And he chose that sacrifice for humanity to show us the path to enlightenment. And Buddha gave up all of his riches and his kingdom. So he showed us the path to renunciation. So these are the markers of the sun consciousness, which are selflessness, greatest responsibility, renunciation, and also existing in divine bliss. Because even though these god avatars would be seemingly going through pain and pleasure, these qualities did not really leave an imprint on their consciousness, which was united with God. And we see similar qualities with spiritual masters or souls that attained enlightenment in a particular life. So whether it's gurus like Sri Yukteswarji or Yogananda, all of them embody these spiritual principles. And these were beings who then stopped creating their own karma because all of their actions were selflessly directed towards God. So they performed kriya or action, but because they were so empty from inside, they had no identity, their actions did not lead to any karma, which would keep them bonded to this reality. So they also then take on the karma of their disciples due to their sacrificial nature. So, such is the nature of beings who are existing in this sun consciousness. So, even though people today are waking up to the fact that we live this Maya and this matrix, people are still trapped in this Maya, because by using techniques like attraction or manifestation and existing in this superficial surrender, where you have a checklist of the things that you want, we are not really practicing the kind of spirituality that will help us activate our inner sun. So, the ideal path of spiritual evolution would be to move out of darkness and realize our God spark and cultivate our inner flame, and eventually walk the path of enlightenment and activate our inner sun. So, in this video, we are going to take a look at the different stages of spiritual initiation, or the progression of consciousness and experiences that one can go through while walking on this path. So, we're going to take a look at very practical things like the changing quality of the different layers of our energy body through different psychological tendencies that we can experience when we're walking on this path. And we'll also look at how this correlates to the activation of our different chakra centers. And we're also going to understand a very interesting process known as the etherization of the blood, which involves this magnetic field that flows from your heart chakra to your third eye chakra, and the changing quality of this magnetic field and of our blood as we align our consciousness more and more with the higher principles of the sun. And if you are new to my channel, I am Priyanka, a writer, researcher, and mystic. And on this channel, we learn how to think like a spiritual scientist. Please hit like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy this video. And with that being said, let's dive right in and begin with understanding that what are the different stages that a soul can actually exist in, to understand that what consciousness is the sun existing in. So the Upanishads explain that the soul can exist in three different states. The first is the state where the soul is existing in this physical material reality, and the second state is the afterlife, where the soul is still in a Maya but in a different plane of consciousness, which is popularly known as heaven or hell. And I've gone deep into the death process and the afterlife in my video, which you can check out. And then the third is the state where the soul has achieved what can be known as an eternal life. So this is when the soul experiences complete ego dissolution. And when I say ego, I don't just mean egotism, which is often associated with vanity or pride, but I mean ego sense, which is this sense of identity that we have, that I am this being and I am this person. So the complete dissolution of your identity and individuality into the infinite consciousness. So this is where you realize that there is no separation between you and God, and that everything is divinity. And this is a transcendental consciousness where a soul could be incarnated, let's say, into this physical realm, and they can take birth and death, but their consciousness is existing in a state of equilibrium, and pain and pleasure does not really leave any imprint on their being. So such is the consciousness of the sun that transcends matter, it transcends life, and it also goes beyond the mind. And this consciousness is also then known as Krishna consciousness or Christ consciousness. And this is because when we look at spiritual science, in different traditions, these God avatars are known to come through the solar logos. So as I've explored in my previous video, that the sun is associated with Vishnu, and Vishnu is a part of the Trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Although Brahma is a finite being and Vishnu and Shiva still have infinite aspects. So all the God avatars from Rama to Krishna to Buddha and even Jesus are known to be an incarnation of Vishnu, who is known to be synonymous with the solar logos or the spirit of the sun, which is one with the infinite consciousness and is characteristic of sustenance or upholding dharma. But Vishnu is also associated with the Hindu Trinity. So the Trimurti is different from the Trinity. The Trimurti is still finite, but the Trinity is all infinite. So the Hindu Trinity involves the first aspect, which is Bhagwan or the ultimate God, and the second aspect, which is Paramatma or the super soul, which is associated with Vishnu, and the third aspect is Brahman or the universal consciousness. So in the Hindu tradition, again, Vishnu is associated with the sun and the second aspect, and we'll also see in the Christian tradition or in esoteric Christianity, the sun is associated with Christ, who is known to be the Son of God, which is the second aspect in the Trinity of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And when we come to esoterica, again, the sun is associated with the second ray of love and wisdom. So in esoterica, there are three governing rays of our entire cosmos. The first governing ray is of divine will and action. The second is of love and wisdom. And the third is of the active intelligence. So in any tradition, if you'll see, the sun is always associated with this second aspect. And it is known to be the solar logos, which is the principle that involves both reason and life force. And it is the cause of everything. So the sun is this divine being that then is also symbolically known to be the heart of our solar system. When the sun exhales, it is giving out life force, and that is literally the reason why we exist. So when the sun will inhale, all the life force will be withdrawn and we will cease to exist. So the sun is literally the heart of the solar system. And this goes into the mystery of understanding the evolutionary process of our solar system, of how every planet is an expression of the sun and will eventually be resolved into the sun. And I'll explore this deeply in my future videos. And this is also something that now science acknowledges, that after billions of years, our earth will eventually dissolve into the sun. And it's not that the heart is symbolically used to describe the sun, but that our heart is actually a manifestation of the sun, and it holds the potential to awaken and enlighten as the inner sun. And we're not talking about the physical heart, but in the depths of our heart, there is this essence or God spark that resembles the sun. And this is something that even the Vedas and Upanishads talk about, that how an immanent divine is residing in the depths of our heart chakra. And this has been encapsulated in the phrase Hridaya Guhayam, Nihitam Guhayam, and Gudham Guhayam. So this means hidden in the secret cavern of the heart. And when Yogananda had his experience of enlightenment, he mentions in his book Autobiography of a Yogi, I cognize the center of the empyrean as a point of intuitive perception in my heart. So this essence can also be known to be a psychic being, which is a concept introduced by Sri Aurobindo. So we have a soul, right? And this soul is moving from incarnation to incarnation, and it is evolving. So the evolution of the soul is described as the soul loosening itself from the grip of the ego and coming under the purview of this psychic being. So the psychic being is known to be this layer around the soul, and the more the soul evolves, the more this psychic being is strengthened and illuminated into our inner sun. And at the heart of our sun lies Kushmanda Devi, who is the highest manifestation of Shakti, and she is also known to be the Jagatnyani. That means she has the knowledge of everything. So once we attain enlightenment, Shakti herself in this form will reside within our soul, within the psychic being at the center of our heart, and that is also what can be seen as awakening our inner sun. Now, this process obviously happens through different incarnations, through different stages of spiritual initiation. And for people who don't know, spiritual initiation just represents the different stages of spiritual consciousness or experiences that one can go through. So obviously enlightenment is a pathless path, but regardless, there are different stages and expression that define every experience, and there are particular archetypal and objective qualities as we walk this path, which can be then defined as spiritual initiation. And when we say initiation, that means there is also an initiator. So this means that when you fundamentally enter this path of enlightenment, you are actively communicating with different spiritual beings. So they are imprinting on their consciousness, and you're tapping into a certain plane of consciousness. So there are spiritual beings who guard that consciousness and make sure that you're ready to enter that realm. And then once you enter that realm, you also receive greater assistance from these spiritual beings, who, the more higher you go, the more selfless in nature they are. And that's why techniques like manifesting for the sake of perfecting this Maya are not going to get you in higher stages of these spiritual consciousness and get you the ultimate freedom. And we take many incarnations to enter this stage of initiation. So before that, we are existing in what can be known as the stage of probation. So this is where you are just beginning to cultivate some self-awareness. So you're beginning to identify your strengths and your weaknesses, and you're realizing that you're not just this individual being, and you're becoming more and more conscious of your pain, and you're realizing what lessons life is trying to teach you. So you're not just waiting for life to teach you lessons. You are becoming more conscious of what quality or what virtue you're supposed to cultivate. So you're still in this stage of probation where you are creating new karma, but you're just also beginning to burn some karma. And even before this stage, we exist in a consciousness where we are completely trapped by the Maya. So we're completely identified with the material world. So we are accumulating more and more karma, and we're not learning our lessons, and we're existing in a completely unconscious state. So it takes a lot to even reach this stage of probation. So, after we are cultivating some self awareness and we've entered this stage of probation, and we move beyond it and we go into the first stage of spiritual initiation, is when our consciousness is then directed inwards to a greater degree. So, the defining quality of entering this first stage of spiritual initiation is that our spirituality becomes less logical and it becomes more a living experience. And this can happen by concentrating our consciousness on two different centers, and this happens naturally also, and it's also something that we're taught to apply. So the two different centers are the heart center and the head center. And ideally, it should first begin with the heart center, but these two processes can also go on simultaneously. So the heart center involves devotion and bhakti. So when your consciousness is directed outward and downward, you can say that you're caught up with your emotions, you're super reactionary. But when your consciousness is directed inward and upward, is when you say that your heart is now dedicated towards devotion. So, focusing on bhakti and devotion is one way to enter this higher realm of consciousness. So, then this involves completely offering your heart to the divine. And when it comes to the head center, so this involves existing in a consciousness where you are observing your thoughts, so entering the witness consciousness. So, enlightenment then has to begin from these centers that are on the upper part of your body. But for this, we also have to stabilize our lower chakras. So, if your lower chakras are not grounded in reality, you cannot just simply begin working with your heart center. And that's what the other stages of spiritual probation are for. So for example, if your sacral chakra is not completely grounded, so you will use pleasure for addiction. So that's when bhakti can literally become delusion, because you're addicted to that feeling of just being out of your body and that dissociation. Or let's say your root chakra is not grounded, so that's when you don't have a sense of security and responsibility in this world. So if you're activating your heart without being grounded in the root, which gives you a sense of security, is when you will be overgiving and you will be absorbing the energies of other people, because an activated heart chakra then allows you to sense what someone else is feeling. So it is really important to be in the stages of probation and the stages below to ground ourselves in the lower chakras before we begin working on the heart and head centers. And Alice Bailey lays down these stages of spiritual initiation very precisely, and even she says that the first stage of initiation is marked by the activation of the heart center, and this can happen through the purification of our astral body. So, the astral body is the seat of our emotions, desires, and symbolic and archetypal energy. So, this involves then attaining a sense of equilibrium in your emotions and attaining a sense of stability, and it also involves cultivating virtues that can be then associated with the heart. So, for example, patience, forgiveness, and all of these different characteristics that can, in a sense, bloom your heart chakra. And along with that, this also involves keeping your desires in check. So, this is the second stage of initiation. So, this would involve cultivating what can be known as non volitional desire. Desire or action that comes as spontaneous realization. So, you know what to do, and your desires are no more coming from a lower part of yourself, from your lower urges, from your traumas, seeking validation, attention. And as you work on sorting out your desires, you are at the level of the throat chakra, which is associated with the element of ether. So, ether is literally the bridge between a material and spiritual reality. And attaining this state of realization is when you literally start seeing this Maya as an illusion. And you realize that if this entire creation has been created and dissolved over a million times, then what's the point of chasing these endless desires? So, this sense of realization is associated with the throat chakra, and dealing with your desires is a very important aspect of this. And then we enter the realm of mind. So after you've cleared out your emotions, sorted them out, and your desires, now you can come to the thought forms, because you cannot attain mental clarity and have purified thought forms if your emotions are destabilized. And it's not that these processes happen one after the other. These are very general conditions for us to understand the different layers, and how their changing quality is essential for our own spiritual growth. So, when you enter the mental body, the layer of your body which is associated with thought forms, that will happen to the extent that now your entire personality is flooded with light, and your thought forms are dedicated to service and non duality. So, this is a very higher stage of consciousness, and we don't reach this stage by suppression. I'm not saying that this is how you're supposed to be now, but this is what our self effort should be dedicated to. And above this comes the causal realm, which is the formless realm of causes. So, this is the supreme reality through which all of the effects of your body are created. So, once you reach the causal realm, which is existing in a completely purified form, and you're drawing energy from there, is when you can say that you've entered the realm of the sun, and you have activated your overmind, and then eventually you will activate your supermind. So all of these lower stages of purifying your lower bodies can be known as first activating your higher mind, then your illumined mind, and then your intuition. And then from the causal realm onwards, you can say that you've activated your overmind, because you're even above the mental body, right? So you've activated your overmind, and then there are different degrees there, and the ultimate is in activating your supermind. So the supermind is a consciousness where knowledge and will are one, and it starts from the whole and sees in its parts and properties, unlike the mind which builds knowledge from parts. So this is a state where then there are no fancies, there are no fantasies, you have no preferences, you have no insistencies, and you're existing in complete divine bliss or solar consciousness. So this is a state of complete gnosis and knowledge, where you've attained complete wisdom. So I'm just going to read out this description of this kind of consciousness from Aurobindo's work. This supramental vastness is also the fundamental truth of being, Satyam, out of which its active truth wells out naturally and without strife of effort into a perfect and faultless movement. Because there is upon those heights no division, no gulf between consciousness and force, no divorce of knowledge and will, no disharmonizing of our being and its action. Everything there is the straight, and there is no least possibility of crookedness. Therefore, the supramental plane of vastness and true being is also Ratam, the true activity of things. It is a supreme truth of movement, action, manifestation, an infallible truth of will and heart and knowledge, a perfect truth of thought and word and emotion. It is the spontaneous right, the free law, the original divine order of things, untouched by the falsehoods of the divided and separative consciousness. It is the vast divine and self-luminous synthesis born of a fundamental unity, of which our petty existence is only the poor, partial, broken, and perverted cutting up and analysis. Such was the sun and the Vedic worship, the paradise of light to which the fathers aspired, the world, the body of Surya, son of Aditi. So such is the consciousness of the sun, which exists in this absolutely perfected state. And now we're just going to take a look at the halo, which is a symbolism of enlightenment. So if you'll see a lot of divine beings, when we see their pictures, you can see a halo or a sun behind their head, and that represents a very specific process that happens in our body as we attain enlightenment. So different scriptures describe a certain magnetic field that goes from our heart chakra to our third eye chakra. And when we attain enlightenment, the nature of this magnetic field completely changes. And Rudolf Steiner, through his clairvoyant vision, has looked into this process and described that this magnetic field is actually our etherized blood, which goes from our heart chakra to a center between our pituitary gland and our pineal gland, which is known as the third eye. And for this, we need to understand that what actually happens to our blood when it flows through our heart. So first of all, the flow of your blood is determined by cosmic and karmic forces. So cosmic is whatever energy you are receiving from the sun or the different celestial bodies in the cosmos, and karmic is whatever karma you have accumulated through your life and what karma you are accumulating through your current life as well. So that is what determines the flow of your blood, and as this blood flows through your heart acts like an alchemical furnace. So we're not talking about our physical heart here, we are talking about our etheric heart. So our etheric heart is the one that remains same through different incarnations. It stores all of your karma, all of your moral striving, and the quality of your inner world. So this blood then flows through the etheric heart, and it acts like an alchemical furnace which transforms the mineral substance of this blood into ether. And then this etherized blood as a magnetic field then goes up to our third eye chakra, and it commingles there as these astral forces. And when we achieve a higher consciousness, the quality of this magnetic field changes. So whenever you acquire a certain virtue or you learn your lessons and you attain a higher consciousness, that is then stored in your etheric heart, and it changes this entire process of the etherization of the blood. So as we attain this sun consciousness, then the forces that commingle in our head represent an enlightened consciousness, which is symbolically then shown as a sun or a halo shining behind our head. And Rudolf Steiner actually describes that how in the future evolution of humanity, this etheric heart will become a sense organ of its own. So it will become a newer perception that the human being will have, and it is meant to then not just draw light from the sun, but it is meant to become a sun in and of itself. So the future human is meant to have an enlightened state of consciousness and a solar heart. And this is also the mystery of the 5D earth and the evolution of consciousness that is often described in spiritual circles. So a heart then will not just be a receiver, but it will become a source of light, and that represents the next stage of evolution of the human being. So that's it for today, guys. I hope this video was insightful, and please let me know in the comments what are your thoughts and opinions, and please like, share and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you soon.